Good morning, everyone, and good evening to our audience joining from Korea. Welcome to GW Institute for Korean Studies, or GWIKS. I'm Yonho Kim, Associate Director at GWIKS. And thank you for joining our special North Korea Economic Forum public webinar. The forum is part of the policy program at GWIKS and aims to promote the understanding of North Korean economic issues and distribute well-balanced, deeply researched, and multidimensional insights on the North Korean economy. And the forum mostly involves closed-door and off-the-record meetings, but we also organize special conferences or webinars like this today, made public throughout the academic year. So today we are discussing North Korea's financial reform measures, focusing on how Pyongyang has been mobilizing domestic financial resources amid international sanctions. Joining us today as a special speaker is Dr. Moon-Soo Yang, a very well-known expert on North Korea's financial system. He is the Vice President for Academic Affairs and a professor at the University of North Korean Studies in South Korea. He's also a policy advisor for South Korea's Ministry of Unification and was the president of the Korean Association of North Korean Studies. I'd like to remind the attendees that we are taking questions from you and the Q&A box is already open. So when you type in your questions, please make sure to identify your name and affiliation. With that, let me turn it over to Professor Yang.
예, 감사합니다. 예, 반갑습니다. 저는 양문수라고 합니다. 예, 한국의 북한대학원 대학교에서 근무를 하고 있습니다. 먼저 오늘 이 뜻깊은 자리에 초청해 주신
University of the North Korean Studies. And I would like to deliver my sincere appreciation to the Institute for the Korean Studies of the George Washington University. Thank you very much. And today I'm going to tell you about the financial reform of the North Korea. And I'd like to have some discussion with the specialists who are located in the US. And it is a great honor for me to have this kind of opportunity. I would like to share my screen before I start my presentation.
네, 먼저 발표 순서는 한 네 가지 파트로 구성되어 있습니다.
And this is the agenda for today.
그 전통적인 금융 시스템에 대해서 알아보고
And I would like to first tell you about the traditional financial systems. And I'm going to tell you about the changes of the financial system in North Korea after the economic crisis, which happened in the 1990s. And I'm going to tell you and what kind of actions were made. So-called financial reforms were made in the era of the Kim Jong Un. And last but not least, I'm going to give you the evaluation on the North Korean financial reform. First, let me tell you about the traditional financial system of North Korea.
One second, Professor Yang, sorry for interrupting, but I think you forgot to share the screen. 화면 공유해 주십시오.
화면 공유했는데요?
I think I did.
We cannot see your screen on our end.
안 보이세요?
안 보입니다.
그러면 잠깐만요. 껐다가 다시 할까요? 계속 안 보이세요?
안 보입니다. No, we cannot see your screen.
잠깐만요. 그러면 껐다가 야 이걸 어떻게 해야 되나? 잠깐만요.
Wait a second, please.
지금도 안 보이세요?
You cannot still see it?
네, 화면 공유 버튼 눌러보십시오. Share screen.
And can you click on the share screen?
다시 들어가겠습니다. 네, 죄송합니다.
Okay, now it's working.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. 자, 북한의 그런 금융 시스템은 이제 네 가지 파트로 이루어집니다.
And I would like to tell you about the 4 talking points. One is the traditional financial system of the North Korea. And I'm going to tell you about the changes in the North Korean financial system after the economic crisis. And that is the talking point number 2. And also, I'm going to tell you about the the so-called financial reform. So what kind of financial reform measures were taken in the Kim Jong-un regime and the Kim Jong-un era? Last but not least, I'm going to tell you about the evaluation of the North Korea's financial reform and its limitations. First, let me tell you about the traditional financial system. As you may understand, the monobank system is usually used. The central bank is taking the role of the commercial bank as well. However, in the capitalist world, we have the two-tier banking system, which means there is a central bank, and in addition to it, there is a commercial bank. They have the two separate roles. In the traditional financial system of the North Korea, it is really simple. Joseon Central Bank, a trade bank, a foreign exchange bank, and some joint venture banks. It's a very simple system. This is the bill of North Korea. The highest value of the denomination is the 5,000 North Korean won. Now, let me tell you about the changes after the financial crisis in North Korea. This is something unexpected from the North Korean regime, and there are lots of the changes in the real economies, and the real economic changes had the impact on the financial system. Let me tell you with the visual presentation. The central bank is providing some money, I mean the providing them salary to the state-run farms. And the residents, based on their salary, buy something, for example, their food and the daily necessities from the state-run stores. And the central bank can recover and they can get the money back. That is how the money circulation was made in North Korea. However, after the economic crisis in the 1990s, the factory was not running well and the daily necessities were not produced in North Korea, which means the state-run stores do not have the stock. They are running out of the food, which means that the government cannot provide the necessary food or the daily necessities. The residents are now relying on the general marketplace, which is called the 장마당. And in 2002, it has become a legal market. They go to the black market in the past. So in the black market, which was used to be the black market, the money was accumulated in the private market. And because of that, on the state-run side, they do not have any money. However, on the private side, they have lots of the liquidity and lots of the money. And the North Korean regime started to consider what kind of measures that they should take. Especially in the 1990s, the banks were out of the financial resources. The banks do not have money, which means, and even though you deposit your money, you cannot withdraw money because the banks do not have money anymore. So if you are the resident of North Korea, you cannot withdraw your money. So as a resident, you have mistrust about the banks. So the bank is somewhere that you should not put your money in. And you can see the internal documents from the Chosen Labour Party, and which was made in the year of the 2002. And to be honest, there is no money in the country right now. But among the residents, money is equivalent to 2 years of the national budget. And that is the comment from the North Korean regime. In 2015, 13 years later, Kim Jong Un made an open letter like this. The state has lots of money. However, we do not have the central control. The money is there, but we do not have the central control on the money. And the money and the funds are outside of the institutional financial system and outside of the government control. Now, the public financial system was not working. However, the private finance is working. They are informal finance system. In the informal finance system, as you know, it is driven by the private sector. The individuals are injecting the liquidity. They are called the donju, and literally translated into money master. And sometimes the banks are providing the fund, and the one who is borrowing the monies are the state-owned firms, usually individuals, trading companies, and the cooperative firms. In a nutshell, the wealthy individuals are providing money, and the state-owned firms and the trading companies are borrowing money from them. It is an illegal market. This is unofficial. market. The public financing is going down, however, the private financing was going up. This is the information from the BOK last year, and we surveyed the North Korean defectors whether they have experience of any informal financing, commercial credit, cash loan, credit resolving association, and there are around 28% of the people who experience this kind of the informal finance, and the loan period is usually 3 to 6 months. And let's take a look at the monthly interest rate. This monthly interest rate is 10 to 19%. And Bank of Korea made a survey over the 212 North Korean defectors who defected from North Korea from 2012 to the 2018. And the average interest rate is around 13% per month. Yearly, the interest rate is calculated into 150%. The money value was going down in the public sector. The North Korean won was losing its power starting from 2002 to 2009. And as you can see in the 2009, there was a currency reform which confiscated the money from the people. And the rice price is the indicator for the inflation. As you can see, the rice price was going up and the won to dollar exchange rate was going up. And this is not the international FX rate. In 2003, you can see there has been the 500 or 400% increase. In 2004, the rice price increased by more than 190%. This kind of significant inflation was existing in North Korea, and the FX rate was going up significantly. This is after the 2009 currency reform. After the 2009 currency reform up until 2013, as you can see, the 100x times of the price increase was made. Starting from 2014, somehow it is relatively becoming stabilized. And another issue in North Korean economy is dollarization. The North Korean won is losing its power, and foreign currencies are preferred by the market players. There was a survey of over 800 North Korean defectors, as you can see visually here in the Changmadang in the general marketplace. And we surveyed which currency is used most often, whether it is the North Korean won, US dollar, or the Chinese renminbi. In 2011, the North Korean won was in dominant position. However, in 2012, the gap was narrowing down, and starting from 2013, there was a crossing point. The Chinese renminbi got the dominant position in the marketplace in 2013. Of course, and we have the North Korean defectors who defected North Korea in the northern region of the North Korea. However, still, it is true that the North Korean won is losing its power, just like the Soviet Union did for the ruble control. The North Korean is trying to have some control for the real economy. However, those kind of the controls are losing their powers. The financial sector had lots of the issues. The private finance is becoming larger and larger, and the public financing system is not working. And people do not want to save their money. However, people have lots of cash. So North Korea wanted to come up with some of the reform measures. They removed the mono banking system and they want to introduce the two-tier banking system. In the Kim Jong-il era, starting from 2004 to 2006, they revised the act. The Central Bank Act was revised and the Commercial Bank Act was enacted. They wanted to introduce a central bank. They came up with a new act. However, that was not put into practice. However, after a decade, his son came into power. Kim Jong Un wanted to have the commercial bank in North Korea. Commercial Bank Act and the Central Bank Act was revised in 2015. The bank organization was changed. One thing interesting is it is typical North Korean policy. They put the central bank as it is, but they do not establish another commercial bank. And they are just utilizing the local branch of the central bank as the commercial bank. And when you go to the Pyeongan-namdo Suncheon City, which is a few kilometers away from the Pyongyang, and the branch of the central bank has a partition, and some of the central bank guys are working as a commercial bank guys. Now you work for the Suncheon Commercial Bank. That's how it worked. And there are 200 cities and the counties. I don't know how many cities they do have the commercial bank, but North Korea started to establish commercial banks. So at the province level, they want to have some commercial bank. And they put some additional functionality for the banks. The Corporate Act was changed, which means the companies can borrow money from the individuals according to the revised act. However, when the company and the individual are making the transaction, there is a man in the middle, which is none other than the bank. And the bank is working as an intermediary between the two. North Korea started to introduce another system, the so-called financial institution profit system, which means the financial institution should earn their profit and they should take care of their expenditure on their own. Each of the individual commercial bank should earn the profit on its own, and you need like to utilize that for the funding, loan, and something else. Along with the commercial banks, you need to get some savings from the citizens. However, North Korea took some additional measures and North Korea took a comprehensive measures. Let's take a look at the enterprises sector. They permitted state-run firms to obtain a loan from the individuals. They revised the act so that the state-run firms and the cooperative firms can borrow money from the individuals. And in the local sector, in the local government, they made some other measures. Starting from the 1970s, they have the local budget system, which means the local government is one is one. And after the sanction, North Korea is talking about the self-sustainment on the national level. However, on the local level, on the local government level, and on the individual level, and on a company level, what North Korea is saying that you are on your own and you need to have the self-sustainment on your own. You should not rely on the help from the central government. That is one of the characteristics of the North Korean policies these days. And the food distribution system was not working that well starting from the 1970s. So some of the food distribution and some of the necessities are taken care by the local government. And there is a local cash distribution system. For example, in the case of the Suncheon city, the cash should be distributed within the city. You collect the money within your local city and you run on your own. And the tax system is really interesting. There is no official tax in North Korea. However, there is a de facto taxation. For example, like a corporate tax. The tax is paid. However, when it is paid, for example, and if you are in the engineering industry or in the engineering sector, you pay the tax for the local government. And if you are located in a certain city, rather than paying for the industry sector, you pay the tax to the local government. The city and the provincial government is collecting the tax from the companies located within the local city or the local province. And that is the funding that can be used for the loan to be handed out to the state-run companies and the companies. And on the commercial sector, North Korea took some measures. State-run stores do not have product to sell, and that is why money circulation was broken. And that is why North Korean people cannot give the money back to the central government. However, now the state-run stores have some product to sell. However, they have the limitation if the price is fixed by the central government. So, when there are products imported from China, it can be circulated through the state-run stores, however, with the market price. Even though they are the state-run stores, they are selling the products at the market price, not the price fixed by the central government. And by doing so, the North Korean regime is trying to solicit some of the consumers back to the state-run stores. And saving has been recommended and encouraged to many of the citizens. However, North Korean citizens do not trust the bank. They know they may not be able to withdraw their fund after they save their money in the banks. So North Korea came up with this kind of the bank card policy. And we are wondering that the North Korean people will not use the card. However, the card usage has been widely spread in North Korea. There are two types of the card. The first one is the prepaid card. This was issued in 2010 by the Joseon Trade Bank. This is the first card, however, only for the foreign currency transaction. However, this card guarantees anonymity. This is not linked to your bank account. And you bring your cash and then you can buy the card. Literally, you can prepay the card. This grants anonymity. The rich people prefer this kind of prepaid card. In 2015, Joseon Central Bank came up with the first Korean won card called the Jeonsung card. And the general residents can utilize the debit card. It is linked to the bank account. There is no anonymity for this debit card. However, people are using this debit card. And when there is a money transfer, you need to have the bank account. That is a mandate from the government. And by using this kind of the card, and from location A to the location B, you can transfer the money. In the past, it was not possible in the bank. However, the central bank is doing this kind of money transfer with the lower fee, and people are changing their mindset because banks are doing some good works. For example, when you pay for your utility bill or the telephone bill, that kind of the bill can be paid with the card. That has been virtually mandated in North Korea. And as you know, there are some cell phones as well. And when you are paying for the cell phone bill, you need to pay it with the card. Even in the department store and even in the library, people are encouraged to use card. The card usage is going up these days. When people are using card, the money is coming to the bank and the money is coming back to the government eventually. Then how should we evaluate these kind of the measures? And there are two characteristics of the financial system in North Korea when there is a reform. And usually the banking sector and the national finance are separated. However, in North Korea, there is a strengthening link between the national finance and the banking. And also the funding source is different in North Korea. In addition to the savings from the resident, which is the usual funding source, they use the national coffer, national financial funding. They collect the tax and the tax benefit and the tax income they have can be utilized by the banks. Before the money is eventually transferred to the central government, the money is staying within the and the commercial bank, and they can utilize this kind of money, the tax income, as a funding for their financial activities. This can be shown just like this. In each of the sector, the North Korean regime took some measures, and they want to recover the money circulation system, and they want to suppress the private finance, and they want to recover the functionality of the public finance, and want to reduce the expenditure from the central government. Eventually, they would like to maximize the mobilization of the domestic funding sources, and they want to put their money into the top priority area. And also they want to stabilize the price and inflation. Let me tell you about the outcome and limitation. North Korea is trying to have indirect control rather than direct control. The farms, banks, residents, and the donju or the wealthy people can have some kind of incentives. This kind of a new incentive mechanism may be working as the North Korean regime wants. For example, when you are borrowing the money, are you going to put the bank as a middleman? And also, the banks are not going to do the illegal work and doing the legal work only. However, there are some limitations. When companies are borrowing money from the individuals, well, how much that can be allowed by the central government or not, and that's not clear. And also, when the individuals and the companies are working together, there must be some transfer of the ownership. That can be problematic in North Korea as well. And many of the developing countries have the same issue, like dollarization, and the public financial system is not working. And people have distrust and mistrust about the banks. People have money. However, they do not put their money into the public sector or the public financial system. North Korean government understands that situation. That is why they are trying to encourage the usage of the card, and they want to recover the as much funds as possible, and they want to reduce the distrust of the people against the banks. I'm not sure how much the policy is going to be successful or not, because the history of the mistrust against the bank is kind of the long. And that's it from me. I would like to move on to the Q&A session, and I'm going to get some more questions and give you more information on it.
Thank you, Professor Yang. That was an excellent presentation about North Korea's financial system and how their coping mechanism is working under the international sanctions. We have already many questions from the audience, but let me pick up some questions that are directly related to Professor Yang's presentation today first. So we have questions from Bill Brown at the bottom of the Q&A box. Is there any competition between the so-called commercial or central bank branches? If a company wants a loan, can it try to get the best deal? And I think the next question is something many experts, many North Korea economy watchers have in mind. Do you have a theory about current high value of won, North Korean won, versus dollar or renminbi, and even more odd, the high value of dollar versus renminbi? It seems easy to make money by arbitrage through China.
예, 그럼 일단 좀 안 되네. 네. 간단하게 답변 드리겠습니다.
And let me put it in a simple way.
일단은 이제 상업은행 간의 경쟁은
And the competition among the commercial banks are is not possible. It's not possible. On the local level, as I told you before, for example, in the Suncheon City, for example, within the Suncheon City, there is only one commercial bank in that city. So there is no competition among the commercial banks because they are working for a certain local government. However, between the commercial bank against the individuals, there can be competition. For the company or the individuals can consider some options. In the past, the interest rate is high and you were able to borrow money. However, in the future, that's going to change. The private market and the what I'm saying is in the past, when then the individual is lending the money to the company, that was illegal. However, if the bank is standing in the middle, the interest rate is going down, the stability goes up. However, the company is exposed. What I mean is their financial activities are exposed to the central government. That is a burden to the companies. So if the transaction is small, the companies can do that. The companies can borrow the money from the commercial bank or the money master, I mean the individuals. They have two options right now. So there can be the competition between the individuals and the commercial banks. The commercial banks can have options whether they are going to be the intermediary between the company and the individual. Or the bank will borrow the money from the individuals and the bank can be the one who is actually executing the loan. That's it.
And about the current exchange rate fluctuations. 네.
예, 그럼 환율 부분에 대해서 말씀.
And let me tell you about the FX rate fluctuation.
전통적으로 이제 북한은 이제 지금 근 7년 동안
Traditionally, for the last 7 years, as you have seen, starting from 2014, the FX rate has been stabilized starting from 2014. However, in the April and the November, the North Korean won has become really strong. And that has been sustained for about a month or the month and a half. That is rarely the case. The North Korean regime is taking some measures. Well, I'm not sure whether it is mainly because of the government intervention or not. However, according to the news sources that I hear, the North Korean regime gave a order not to use the foreign currency. There is a foreign currency usage ban. And in that case, the FX rate goes up usually because it is going out of the balance. And the money will come back and then they are going to hit the balance eventually, which means that they needed to buy the foreign currency so that the FX rate usually goes up. That is usual. However, in North Korea, that is going in reverse direction. And we can infer just like this because of the COVID-19, they do not have any trade with China right now and it is not likely to recover in the near future. North Korean residents do not have the demand for the foreign currency. They do not want to buy the foreign currency or the USD actively. The social control is really tight because of the COVID-19, and the North Korean regime is giving the strong order against the usage of the USD or the exchange of the USD. Only the government can do that. That is the message being delivered by North Korea. National Information Service made an update in the National Assembly in South Korea, and there was a news a currency exchange guy was executed in North Korea. Well, I'm not sure what is the exact reason for the execution for the currency exchange guy. And I'm not able to get the exact information. The reason that he or she was executed was because the guy purchased lots of the foreign currency. He collected lots of the foreign currency, and he was going against the FX direction of the regime, and the FX rate should go down. According to the government policy, however, exchange the money exchange guy was going against the North Korean policy. However, this kind of imbalance cannot go for a long time. However, as long as the border is tightly controlled, probably it's gonna be continued. And there can be tighter control for about a month or two. However, it cannot be sustained for a long time. And then the FX rate would go up again. And the core message of the North Korean government is this. The FX was going up, so the North Korean government can buy or the collect some of more foreign currency. That's what North Korean government wanted to do. As the FX rate was going down, which means the won value was going up, and they can be helpful for the central government. And North Korean government probably want to get out of the dollarization, and they want to have the more control by the Korean won and over the Korean won. That is why they created this kind of a situation. But again, and regarding this, there is no way that I can give you the 100% correct information. That's just my estimation.
Thank you. Next questions are from Marcus Noland. What is your estimate of the annual rate of inflation in North Korea? And the next question is about the government bond. This spring, there was supposed to be a large government bond issuance. Can you comment?
북한 같은 경우에는 뭐 항상 그렇습니다만은
In the case of the North Korean economy, it is really difficult to understand the overall annual inflation rate. As I showed you visually, the price for the rice can be the key indicator for the overall inflation. Of course, we can get some information about other products. Some of the Korean government guys have some information, but I do not have access to that kind of the information yet. So as you said, and we can estimate the inflation, but it's really difficult to estimate the inflation. However, the rice price is being stabilized. For some of the imported items, the price is going up, as far as I understand. And regarding the government bond, and according to the foreign policy and some of the media report, I can see the national bond was issued according to some of the media, but when I collected more information and when I take a look at it, so far, the North Korean government did not issue the national bond. That has not been verified yet. And if the bond was issued, and you can see the physical paper of the bond, but we were not able to see the bond yet. There was no one who actually saw the bond. Even after 6 months after the media report, we cannot see the bond, and probably that is why the bond was not issued. And I personally believe whether they had any intention to issue the bond or not, but as far as I know, according to my judgment, the bond was not issued.
Thank you. Next question is from Yongchul Ha. So given the expansion of the non-state financial institutions, what are the implications for the scale of private sector and the state control over economy in general?
사금융의 규모에 대해서 추정하는 것은 사실은 뭐 불가능한가 마찬가지입니다.
And actually, it is difficult to understand how widely the private finance has been used or not. And it is really difficult to have that kind of estimation. But as I told you before, According to the information from the BOK, which was a survey over the 200 North Korean defectors, they made a survey and we can see how much they experience the private finance. However, it is only a part of the information. They are the ones who are borrowing the money. They are not the ones who are lending the money, and we have only partial information. And based on that information, we are trying to estimate the information. And around 28% of the people have experience about the private finance. But again, and we cannot know about the overall size about the private finance in North Korea. When the private finance is expanding and when the public finance is going down, it is like a two sides of a single coin. It is a huge challenge to any of the national government. In the 1950s and the 1960s in South Korea, we had a huge private finance market. And that has been accommodated into the institutional financial system. And so probably in North Korea, the private finance should be accommodated into the public sector, and many of the measures are being taken, and the Kim Jong Un regime is now taking the first step toward that direction.
Thank you. Next question is from Paul Tyson. It's about North Korean people's long-term savings behavior. So how do North Koreans do long-term saving? Do they have access to foreign currencies, gold, silver, antiques, or art that they could buy with a view to the future?
북한 주민들이 이제 어쨌든 그 롱 세이빙을 하는 방법은
And for the long-term saving, it's really simple. The public institution is not well developed. So there can be two or three measures. The first one is they can buy some physical asset like a gold, but there are not that many precious assets, and usually they have cash. And but when you buy the cash, usually it is in USD. And I told you about the dollarization. And we can divide the dollarization in two ways: the dollar for the currency and the dollar as an asset. So, as I told you about the visual diagram, which is the yuan is the biggest currency. The dollar is relatively weak. And however, as for the asset for the long-term value, in that case, people usually rely on USD, not the North Korean won. The second option can be the Chinese renminbi for the long-term asset. And there are some investment targets. For example, North Korean people are investing in the apartments. And North Korea has the 30 years history of marketization. And the property can be one of the best investment option. The apartment price will go up, and that can be as lucrative as the other investment options. North Korean people are willing to buy some apartment and then some of the buildings. However, the land is not being transacted right now. For the gold and the silver, and North Korean people do not have access to the gold and silver that much.
Thank you. Next question. It's about the electronic payment system. You already explained about the prepaid and debit cards in North Korea. So this question is asking about how widely those cards are used outside Pyongyang. In the rural areas, do they have any access to this electronic payment systems? And I personally is also curious whether the COVID-19 pandemic has any impact on the scope of the usage of these debit cards or prepaid cards?
아까도 말씀드렸듯이 이제 북한의 은행 카드는
In North Korea, there are some bank system which was introduced in 2010. They have 10 years of the card transaction. They made lots of evolution.
우리 선생님께서 말씀하신 것처럼 초창기에는
As you said, in the early days, the foreign currency card and the prepaid cards were available, usually in Pyongyang's rich people.
그러다가 이제 점점 지방
However, as time goes by,
워커홀
people outside of the Pyongyang started to use the card, and the Pyongyang and the non-Pyongyang income gap is existing. However, for the non-Pyongyang, are they really poor? No, it is not the case. For example, in the case of the Cheongjin or the Sinuiju, they are the non-Pyongyang, but they are the largest cities within the province, and then there can be relatively rich people, and they are using the cards. So in the case of the Jeonsong card, the debit card made a significant change because it is linked to your bank account. So the North Korean government is encouraging the card usage. There are lots of the encouragement mechanisms. For example, when you are making the wire transfer from the city A to the city B, and for example, from the Hamgyeongbukdo to the other place, you can make a wire transfer based on your card. When you making a wire transfer, you need a card. And for the wired and the wireless telephone, you need to have your card. And when we made an interview for the North Korean defectors, the North Korean defector told us in the non-Pyongyang areas, there are more and more people who are using cards. In the rural area, of course, and their income level is much lower than the urban area, so they are not using card that much. However, in the urban area, even though they are outside of the Pyongyang, people are using card, and in some of the relatively big rural town, many people started to use the card.
Let me add one more question as a follow-up question about the money transfer, private money transfer among the people. So Donju has been playing a really great role in the private money transfer among the people. But now you said people are using bank cards. So the money transfer through the official banking system is more and more accessible and more popular. What are the reactions from the money masters, 돈주s?
예, 재미있는 질문이십니다.
That's an interesting question.
이제 일종의 그런 상황들이죠. 앞에 두세 분 앞에 말씀 주신 그분이 이제 사금융과 공금융
And there was a question about the private finance and the public finance. In the past, the public finance was close to dead and the private finance was really active. However, it is kind of the retaliation from the public finance. They are coming back. So there is a partial competition between the private and the public finance, especially in the wire transfer, as you pointed out. In the wire transfer area, the Central Bank of North Korea provide the wire transfer and they cut down the fee significantly. And there has been the transfer, let's say the private sector transfer was 100 by the money masters. However, the central bank cut down the fee to the 5 or 10 level. So for the North Korean citizens, because the wire transfer fee is much lower. So the citizens think that, oh, I can rely on the public sector. How about the money master? Money master is cutting down their fee again. However, the central bank's fee is really, really low. So there are so many people in the banks. There are so many people. And the bank is overpopulated. They have to wait for the 30 minutes or 1 hour for a simple wire transfer. So there are pros and the cons between the private and the public finance. The public finance has the really low fee. However, it takes some time. For the private sector, the money master, and though their fee is relatively bigger, but they are relatively faster. So there is a new mechanism of the competition between the private and the public finance.
Really interesting stories. Lot of new dynamics going on in North Korea, I think. I have one quick follow-up question from Bill Brown. Do you think there is a lot of speculation going on, borrowing won and buying cheap renminbi? What happens when speculation bets go wrong?
물론 이제 뭐 그 환율에 따라서 이제 그
Yes, it's about the FX rate. There can be some FX rate speculation. You buy a certain currency, and based on the fluctuation of the FX rate, yes, it may go wrong, and there are risks. However, it is possible there will be some people who are losing money and gaining money because of the FX fluctuation, just like in the case of this in November, when the FX rate is going down significantly, when it is sustained for about a month or two, and there will be winners and the losers. But we still do not have any concrete information on it. And it is highly likely, it is reasonable that there will be the people who are working on the speculation. However, the central government of North Korea is trying to manipulate the FX rate, if that is the case. And for the losers, the government do not care about them because the central government has their own aim, and then central government is going to have the stronger control, especially for those money masters. And the money masters should just bear with the losses, and they have no other way because the government is making a sudden and unexpected action. So the money masters are losing money. However, when the market is normalized, so probably there will be some difficulties for the central government to do some policy activities because they are going to lose their policy consistency, and it's going to cause lots of the complaints from the people and other stakeholders. And whether be it the speculators or not, there are many people who are losing money, and probably in the future, they're going to complain to the government.
Thank you. Next question is from Bill Newcomb. With COVID-19 measures likely depressing economic activity and likewise causing government revenue to drop, probably sharply, how might government respond to this?
실제로 이제 그 올해 4월 초에
In the early April this year, they have the highest citizens plenary session, and then they made a forecast for their budget. And for the tax income, the biggest one is coming from the kind of the corporate tax. It's the corporate tax and the value added tax in our sense. However, the increase is less than 1%. After the 2010, there has never been a case that the income is increasing less than 1%. So the government will have the less tax revenue. So the government can take some traditional measures. I'm not sure about it, but I can estimate that it is likely that according to the Lodong newspaper, in the 1st of June, The headline is about the Kim Jong Un's maneuver and his actions. When I read the newspaper was mentioning that
삼지연시 건설, 삼지연 다들 아시죠? 그러니까 북한이 이제 육정을 투하해서 그 삼지연시 건설에
the
모든 그
Samjiyon
관계자들과 일꾼들을 모두
city
이사를 보내셨다라고 해서
was built
구체적인
and
지시와 이름까지
Kim
나옵니다.
Jong-un delivered his
거기에 보면
appreciation to
연설문이
the
있는데
workers, and there are
그게
18
18
people
사실
mentioned.
이게 무슨 그건지 몰랐는데
I was not sure what kind of story that was, and I believe those
적어도
18 people
2011년쯤
are the
청와대를 건설하기
money
위해서 사회복지를
masters.
위해
And
노동시민들이
when they made a
모여서
huge
삼지연
infrastructure
시설 운영을
project,
거론하면서
and
이야기를
Kim
했습니다.
Jong-un is mentioning the 25 or the
그런
dozens of the
지시
people,
자금 조달을
probably they
거둬들여서
are the money
그것을
masters.
낼 수 있도록
And North Korean
일본과
government is
일본과
utilizing the funding
북한과
sources
한미일
from the money
관계를
masters, I mean the
어떻게
individuals.
장악을 하라. 어떤 식으로 이제 재집중화라는
And North
목표를
Korea wants
집중화라는
to
목표를
have the
설정하고
control over the
그런
resources
보도를
available.
했습니다만 가끔 파편적인 보도로 나오는 것들이 이른바 준조세, 직접적인 조세뿐만 아니라
The
상습적인
quasi taxation
부양해임 같은
will be
일부분도
made
나오고
and
있습니다만
expanded
그것
on and
말고도
off.
다른 충분치 않을 것으로
However,
보입니다.
that kind of
따라서 이제
fragmented measures will not be
중국과
adequate
최근
enough.
11월 달에 나타났던 환율 변동을 통해서
So, especially in the
상승세를
case of
이끌어냈습니다.
the FX
그러나
fluctuation made in November,
우리가
probably that
그때
is one of the ways to
초반을
observe the foreign currency that is existing in the market.
Thank you. This could be the last question, depending on how you will be responding. Um, question from Kenji Sawai. Our free world couldn't change the system of the Chinese regime. The tremendous financial growth couldn't change the regime itself. Then how can we make sure the irreversible free system in North Korean regime with accelerating the economic growth? So financial development or economic growth, the relationship between the economic growth and the regime itself.
예, 뭐 자유에서 중국을 바꾸지
The
못했던
free world was not able to change the China, and we are not likely change the North Korean regime. And China is an open society, is a kind of a member of the international society, but North Korea is not, especially their finance system. The free system was not able to change the China, even worse, in North Korea. But one thing I can tell you is, of course, it depends on the timing. For example, and is it right that we can say that the China is not in the free system and the free system is the best way to make the development? Well, I don't know.
Thank you. Then let me take one more quick question. This I think this is going to be the last question. Yongchul Ha, he actually asked his question in Korean, so you can read it at the bottom of the Q&A box. So the question is, Professor Yang, you said in your presentation that the usage of Chinese yuan is growing. That's the trend we are watching. Then how does it impact the demand for dollar in North Korea?
네. 사실은 이제 그 저희들도 이제 연구를 하면서 되게 좀 어려웠던.
Well, when we are studying, this is one of the challenging topics. In North Korea, there are two trends, yuanization and dollarization. And what is the implications between the two? And vice versa. And what is the implications between the two? Well, that has not been deeply studied yet. But for the North Korean citizens, it depends on the region by region. In some region, the supply will be different, even though there is a demand. The foreign currency supply must be different for the dollar and the Chinese renminbi. And if you can choose between the two, For example, you're going to consider your convenience and the future asset value when you are using a certain currency.
한편으로는 주민의 입장에서 위안화 사용과 달러화 사용이 보완적인
For
방식으로
the
진행될
North Korean citizens, they can be replaceable each other and they can compensate each other according to the situation. It is different.
Thank you, Professor Yang. With that, let me conclude today's webinar. For your information, this was the last webinar hosted by GWIKS this year. I promise we'll get back to you with more exciting programs next year, so stay tuned. And I'd like to thank Professor Yang for staying up late at night for us. It's already midnight in Seoul. Hopefully you will have a good night's sleep there. And I'd also like to thank our technical team and Minhee, our program coordinator, for putting this together, and Mr. Junho Lee for his excellent simultaneous translation. And thank you all for joining us. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.